Hi everybody, welcome to the show. Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. My name is Amanda. I am a teacher turned homeschool mom. This is Raising A to Z. It is a YouTube channel all about homeschooling. And today is part 2 of our Q&A. So you guys asked some questions. I am going to answer them. We did part 1 last week and you guys had some amazing questions in there. If you want to see what the part 1 was, we'll put the link up here for you guys. You can check that out. But today I have another group of questions for you guys that I think are just as great. They're definitely things that we get asked often, and so I'm going to answer some of those questions. But before we do that, why don't you guys take a second to subscribe and click the bell? And if you guys are interested at all in looking for a homeschool planner, I have one. This is the Essential Homeschool Planner. It is our homeschool planner that I have designed. It is everything that you would want in a homeschool planner. It has everything from your daily lesson plans, space to do your daily lessons, to a monthly overview, to a place to put in book lists and schedules and all kinds of things. So if you are looking for a great homeschool planner, you're going to want to check this baby out. The Essential Homeschool Planner is available on our website or on Amazon. So check that out. Let's get into some more of the questions that you guys have submitted. Question number 1, do you ever struggle to get your kids to sit and learn each day? Yes. Yes, you do. Everybody does. You're gonna definitely have days where the kids just don't want to do it. If you are having a hard time getting your kids to sit down and do their work, first off, I would just say try to establish a routine. My kids are pretty used to it. When I say it's time for school, they run down, they do their schoolwork, and they're done with it. They get to move on to something else. So whether they love it or not, they've just gotten into that routine of we go in, we do it, we can move on to other things. So it's not even really a question for us. But there are days where they start and they just are not interested in doing what I've put out for them. Sometimes it helps to switch things up. So I noticed that my kids were often having a difficulty in our workbook block kind of at the end. So what we were doing is we were doing language and math and then finishing with usually some kind of activity and then with reading. And I was finding by the time we got to reading, I'd already lost them. It was just, we were never getting to our reading, or by the time we got to reading, we were just overwhelmed and tired. So I kind of switched it up. So now we start with a read aloud and then we go into our English and then our math. And I found we've gotten a much better dynamic because the little ones are done quicker. And so when they're done, they can just move on, and then I get more one-on-one time with Alexi. And so I can work with her a little bit more, especially on, because her topics are a little bit more difficult. So sometimes just switching things up a little bit and your routine really helps. I also find that if you're routinely having problems getting your kids interested, either A, they're really not interested in what you're teaching them, and maybe you should find something they are interested in, change your topics. Or more frequently, I do find that maybe you just have too much. You're expecting too much of them every time they sit down. And in that case, I would recommend trying to shorten what you're expecting them to do and giving them more breaks throughout, if that makes sense. Because then it's less overwhelming for them. So like I said, we are doing less than an hour a day, and that seems to be doing really well in our household for kids 4 and 6. So if you're trying to do multiple subjects and you're trying to get them to sit there for 2 or 3 hours at a time, that might just be too much for them and it's starting to cause some resentment. So shorten your blocks, give some more breaks, and hopefully that helps. This was a great question. It not only affects homeschoolers, but it also affects teachers as well. So I love these kinds of questions. So the question was, what do you do with different learners and multiple kids? When I read this question, this is what I'm thinking. I think the question is, when you have kids who have different learning styles, so some are auditory, some are visual, some are hands-on, and you have multiple kids, how do you hit how do you manage that many kids who all have different needs in one session? How do you do that? So basically, teachers are taught this, or they were taught this, they were when I was in teachers college, that kids basically fall into, and not just kids, humans, fall into primarily three groups. There are a couple others, but they're not such great for the classroom setting. But basically, people fall into 3 different groups of learners. You have visual learners, people who do really well when they see something. So they do really well with looking at notes, reading charts, having those things explained through pictures and actually being shown. You have auditory learners, who are people who do really well when things are explained to them or when they're listening to them. So they do really well with lectures, with videos where they're listening to things, and when someone like explains things to them. And then you have what we call kinesthetic learners, which are basically people who really like to do things hands-on. They like to be able to physically move stuff, touch stuff, break things down, build them back up. That's how they learn best. So basically those are kind of the three main styles of learning. And sometimes you have a kid who's very auditory, sometimes you have a kid who's very visual, sometimes you have a kid who's very hands-on or kinesthetic. And what do you do when you have multiple kids and they're all different levels? So this is an interesting question because I've always thought it was a weird thing. In Teachers College, we were always taught that like you need to like make sure that your lesson has something that caters to each of the styles, because you want to make sure you're getting all the kids. That was something we were taught in Teachers College, and it never really made sense to me, because shouldn't people, like, while you might have a strength in learning from one style, you would benefit from learning the other two as well. And so actually it's been interesting that recently a study came out that says these learning styles are not as predominant as we once thought they were. So basically it was once believed that like if you were a visual learner, pretty much everything you learned needed to be visual. And if you were being like lectured, you were going to miss massive amounts of information. That was kind of the leading thought. And that's why people were like, well, you have to make sure you get your visual learners. You have to make sure you get your auditory, because if they're not getting what's being fed to them in their natural learning way, they're going to miss it. New studies have come out to suggest that's not true. It's probably the quickest and easiest way for them to get information, but people can still learn from styles outside of their own. And I personally believe that when you hit the different ones, you're actually building more like connections, right? So you're getting more hooks in there so that they actually are understanding it through different means. What I always recommend is trying like this, like it still goes back to what we were taught in Teachers College, but just for very different reasons, is that you kind of want to try to have a visual explanation, an auditory explanation, and if possible, a hands-on lesson or activity that is going to help connect all of those things together. So that's still my recommendations. Sometimes it's harder than others. Like I'm thinking of like, okay, we're working on sentence structures. Okay, so here's my auditory explanation, is that a sentence has a capital at the beginning, a period at the end, it has a noun, and it has a verb. Those are the big things that a sentence must have. Then I might like take out a sentence and like explain it to Alexi or Zoe and say like, look, here, this sentence, here's your visual. This first letter of the sentence is a capital. There is a period at the end. And then this is your noun. It is your person, place, or thing. This is your verb. This is what the person, place, or thing is doing. That's the action. So here we have, that's what it looks like. Then you might want to take up a sentence, write it out, and then cut it up and have the kids figure out where things go and putting it in order. That would be your kinesthetic lesson, right? So you've hit all three of those things at the same time or very quickly, and that's how kids can get benefits of all three styles. So if that is kind of like something you're struggling with because you have kids who learn so very differently, I would focus on trying to get all three of those kind of big components in there, and again, keeping it short, but doing all three of those things so that you're hitting kind of all their different styles and helping them connect to something that really clicks with them. Next question. It was actually a two-parter. The first part, do we plan on having any more kids? No, that ship has sailed. I've always said I have two hands, which means I can handle 2 kids on my own comfortably, and that is as many kids as I want to have. So 2 and done. The second question is, are we planning to homeschool all through high school? Well, Alexi is entering grade 1, so I have at least 8 years to figure that out. But at this point, we are neither here nor there. I think it would depend on what they want to do. I think it depends on what they're interested in career path-wise. And I think it's also going to depend on like what kind of programs are available to them at the time. So we do have a high school that we both love, that we think would be a great fit for our kids if they choose to go to high school. And that's kind of where we think they might go eventually. But even then, we're not sure if they would do the full 4 years or if they would just go and do a couple classes here and there. It's very much up in the air. And like I said, we have at least 8 years to figure that out. So that's where we stand. The next question is a great question. It was about financing and budgeting for homeschooling. Do we start the year with a set budget? Do we track that? How do we track that? How do we keep our homeschooling budget organized? And why would we want to? So lots of questions about budgeting. I think we'll do another video on this all together because I think it's a great question. But basically we do have a budget. We put money, automatically comes out of our paycheck on a certain day into a separate account, and that is where it stays until we need the money, and then we just transfer it either onto our credit card if I bought something online, or onto our debit card to pay for something. And our homeschooling budget accounts for everything from curriculum. It accounts for one like big school supply shopping trip at the beginning of the year when prices are the cheapest. And it will account for classes the kids take, as well as any memberships. So those are kind of the big things that come out of that. And we track it just so we don't overspend. Where we live, there is no benefit to tracking your expenses, so you can't claim curriculum or expenses or anything for tax purposes. So I guess that's something that you can do in other places, but you can't do that here in Ontario where we live. So there's no real reason why you have to do that, but we just find it works well for us, so that we're not just like constantly buying homeschooling stuff, because there's so many amazing things out there. And then beyond those things, we kind of like to use like vacations and Christmas and birthday, like if we're going to buy them a gift or something, we kind of tend to buy things that are going to be helpful or useful to their homeschooling, or that they're interested in, or that will be educational in some way. So for example, this fall we're going to be studying dogs as like a topic. That's going to be our unit study for the month. And so Zoe's birthday just passed. So for her birthday, she got some little tiny figurines of different dogs, different dog breeds. She loves little figurines, so that is going to be something that she likes to play with, but also it is going to serve our purposes when we are doing stuff with dogs and talking about dogs later on in this year. So that's kind of how we do things. But I'm always thinking of like, okay, what do they need and what would they like, but what would also be great for our homeschooling purposes. So that way, like, we're kind of stretching our budget. So our Christmas budget kind of like seeps into helping us with our homeschooling budget as well, birthday budget, stuff like that. So yeah, that's how we do it. Next question is, what do you do when your kids don't want to do school? And this is very similar to the first question that we talked about here, but I think it's a totally different question. So what do you do when your kids just like refuse to do school? I think you have to look at the frequency of it. If it is like a one-time thing, like sometimes Lexi comes in, she goes, nope, I don't want to do anything. Okay, so if it's a one-time thing, I would go, or like a very infrequent, like once a month, I would go in with a negotiation. Because every day, we all have days. Like, I think that's the nice thing about homeschooling is like, you're feeding into their cues. So sometimes kids are tired. They're not mentally into it. They're emotionally not there. They just really don't want to do what you're doing and what you're asking them to do. And so I do have like, I will negotiate with Alexi. I said, okay, my plan for today was to do 1 page of English and 2 pages of math. What would you like to do instead? And sometimes she'll go like, I want to do 2 pages of English and 1 page of math, because she thinks the English activity is easier than the math. Cool. Like sometimes she goes, I just want to do 1 of each. Great. At least I've gotten something done, right? So maybe I haven't done everything I was planning on doing, but at least we've done a little bit. And I do find that sometimes negotiating and telling her, this is what I was planning, what do you think is acceptable, does help kind of like normalize it and make it feel like they're part of the conversation, which I do feel like helps kind of get them on track. If you're having problems with your kids who are constantly refusing to do schoolwork, totally different story and very different approach. I would ask them why. If it is like you've just come to homeschooling, and they're saying, no, I'm just tired, I don't like it, and I hate school, you need some time to deschool. You haven't deschooled enough. We have a whole video on deschooling and why it's so important. We'll put the link up here. If this is like you've been homeschooling for a long time and your kids are not really into the idea of schooling and they're fighting you on it, 2 things. 1, I would look at how much you're trying to do in a day and half it. My biggest recommendation is if you're finding your kids are fighting you all the time, try to limit how many subjects you're teaching. Like, I only teach about 3 to 4 subjects at a time in a whole month. like we do 4 subjects. So we do English, we do math, we do art, and then we might do science or social studies, and we rotate between them. I don't do social studies and history and music, and like I don't do it all at the same time because that's a lot for kids. Like that's a lot, and there's no need for there to be that much. So I would look at like reducing what you're expecting them to do, number of subjects and the amount of time, because maybe you're just spending too much time and they're getting tired and they're mentally having a hard time processing it. The other thing that I would do is look at following something that they're interested in. Make sure that what you're teaching them is stuff that they're actually interested in. Unit studies are great for this. If they're really finding you, then okay, let's pick a topic and learn everything we can about it for a little while and kind of see if that is a different way that you can kind of retrain and get everyone back on board. So those would be my recommendations if things are becoming confrontational every time you mention school. And then kind of on the same note, another question that came in was, what do we do when a kid doesn't like a subject? And I think this could also really help with what do you do if your kid doesn't like school. So I'm hoping that they're kind of connected, but they're a little bit different. Sometimes kids just have a hard time with a subject. One of the nice things about homeschooling is that we can follow our kids' strengths and work on their weaknesses appropriately. I also have the belief that not every kid needs to be great across the board. I think that's a really dangerous and really unhealthy expectation. Your rocket scientist is not necessarily at home writing poetry or painting masterpieces, right? Like people have different strengths and we need to kind of like play into that. So maybe they're not super great at one subject, but they're really great in other, then let's really focus on that and kind of build this one up to where they need it to be to function, right? So for example, math is a common one. A lot of kids hate math. So what do you do when your kids hate math? My first instinct is always to go with make it practical. So I think whenever you have kids who hate a subject, it's because it doesn't relate to them and they have no interest in using it. So if you can, make it real life. So if you're gonna be talking about fractions, okay, we're gonna build stuff. We're going to go and do experiments where we need to have different fractions. We're gonna do some baking where we need to we're gonna double this batch of muffins, which has all these fractions in it. That's the kind of math that is going to get kids interested because it's real life and it affects them. Kids like cookies. And if you're like, hey, we're making a double batch of chocolate chip cookies and I have to take 1/2 cup of butter and I have to put and I'm gonna double it, how much butter am I gonna need? That's real life math that makes sense to them. So if you're having a hard time, try to pick topics or subjects or concepts that you can make real life and try to hook them in that way. I know sometimes, especially in math and science, the things are more theoretical and that's a really hard concept for kids. It's really hard for kids who are young to understand theoretics because developmentally, their brains are so focused on concrete stuff that it can be very difficult. So real life math can make things really easy. And you can do that for any subject, try to make it real life. Connect with stories that are real life for them. Again, and I don't think I say this, maybe I don't say it enough because I feel like it's in almost every video. Follow their interests. You can teach so much if you follow their interests. And like I said, this is one of the reasons why I love unit studies is because you can pick something they're super interested in and just deep dive into it. And you're gonna hit so many different subjects. So for example, let's say you have a kid who is obsessed with painting. They love to paint, they're always painting. That's all they wanna do is painting. You can take that so many different directions. You can do artist studies where you're looking at famous painters. You can do, if you're doing a famous painter, then maybe you can also talk about what the world around them was. So this is what 18th century France was like. We're talking revolution. This is the politics and these are some of the problems and this is why he's painting this painting. It's talking about this. You're hitting history, not just art. You can do color theory, which is how to mix colors. That's science because that's about light. You can do actually physically mixing your paints, which is chemistry and learning recipes, how light works and making sure your lighting is right is science. If you're doing perception, you're talking about mathematical concepts and ratios, like the golden ratio and making sure things are properly positioned on your page. You're getting into some math there. You're also you can also do when you're reading about these things, you're hitting literature and English. We just talked about 5 different subjects all while talking about painting, right? So this is one of the reasons why I always think that if you're struggling, picking a unit study can be a great way to hook kids into learning. And that's why I always recommend them when people are struggling, is like drop things for a little bit and pick a unit study and just see where the rabbit trails take you. Those are some great questions. I'm so happy that I could answer them for you. If you have more questions, please leave us a comment below or hit us up on our social media, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. If you guys like these videos and you want to see more of them, make sure that you subscribe and click the bell so that you get notifications when we put out a video every Monday. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next week.